Today, I'm going to just provide a summary and provide an overview of the total maximum daily loads for Canyon Lake and Lake Elsinore, and both of the TMDLs that are applicable now, which were adopted originally in 2004, as well as the efforts undertaken by the task force, and I'll explain the task force as well, in conjunction with the Santa Ana Regional Water Board staff to revise and update those 2004 TMDLs for both lakes. First, let me show you here. This is obviously, I think, a photo you're all familiar with, a satellite photo of the two lakes. I just love this photo as it shows Canyon Lake, which to me looks like a salamander or a dragon. If you have a good, if you're a Game of Thrones fan like myself, you can kind of see a little bit of dragon in there for Canyon Lake. And then, of course, we have Lake Elsinore, which is the large water body, which is tinged green, unfortunately, but some of the challenges we all face with Lake Elsinore and Canyon Lake. So before talking about the total maximum daily loads, I want to briefly set the stage as to why we have what we call TMDLs for Canyon Lake and Lake Elsinore. In short, TMDLs are required when water bodies are impaired and do not meet applicable water quality standards. Water quality standards include the designation of beneficial uses, as well as the water quality objectives necessary to support those beneficial uses. Going back to about 1975 or thereabouts, the Santa Ana Water Board identified water bodies throughout the Santa Ana region and their designated beneficial uses. As you can see here on this slide, Canyon Lake's designated uses include municipal drinking water, as well as the recreational beneficial uses and warm freshwater ecosystems. Lake Elsinore's is a little bit different in that it does not support the municipal drinking water use, and actually it is designated here as that it is absolutely accepted from the municipal drinking water use, and in large part because of the salinity levels that we know we have within Lake Elsinore. But both lakes have the recreational beneficial uses, and again, warm. And warm is what we refer to for warm freshwater habitats for warm water ecosystems. Now, the water quality objectives that we are working with here for why the lakes were considered impaired and going back to the 90s is in the regional board's basin plan for the Santa Ana region. We have a narrative objective for algae, which is that waste discharges shall not contribute to excessive algal growth in inland surface receiving waters. And then we also have the dissolved oxygen water quality objective, which says that surface water shall not be depressed below 5 milligrams per liter for waters that designated as warm. And again, that's as a result of controllable water quality factors, i.e. those factors that can be controlled, anthropogenic inputs, versus those that are natural and uncontrollable. Not a surprise to any of you that probably here today, but the lakes have endured some water quality issues over the years, the biggest ones being algal blooms and fish kills. The cause of the water quality problems are typically or primarily related to excess nutrients in the form of phosphorus and nitrogen, which we collectively refer to as nutrients, and of course the depletion of oxygen, creating issues for the warm freshwater ecosystems. What are the sources of the nutrients to the lake? Well, it's from all of us, right? It's just a part of life in that in our watersheds, nutrients are natural, and we also increase the amount of nutrients, whether it's from urban, agricultural use, erosion from the land, from just the land base, septic systems over the years can contribute to those nutrient loadings. And of course, we see increased nutrient loadings during high storm events. These impairments under the federal law trigger what we call the need for the total maximum daily loads. So under the Federal Clean Water Act, once waters have been listed as impaired on what we call the 303D list, we're required, or the regional board and state are required to prepare total maximum daily loads. The purpose and goal of TMDLs is to attain the applicable water quality standards, or in other words, support those beneficial uses for which the water bodies are listed, recreational and the warm ecosystem uses. While this is easily said, of course, it's not always easy to achieve. And further, in California, in addition to just having what we call the technical TMDL, which are the numeric allocations, the regional water boards prepare implementation plans for how they and the dischargers need to go forward in trying to implement and meet and attain the total maximum daily loads. And they do this through the incorporation of requirements into discharge permits or waste discharge requirements that are issued by the Regional Water Board. I'm going to speak briefly about the 2004 TMDL so you have a base understanding. Many of you probably already do, but just as a recap so you can understand kind of where we're currently at, what's currently required, and where we're trying to move forward in order to make revisions based upon data and information that has been collected over the years. So first of all, the 2004 TMDL set loads for total phosphorus and total nitrogen for both lakes. Dischargers subject to the loads were to achieve compliance with these loads by December 31st of 2020, and it is looked at as a 10-year running average. In addition to establishing the loads themselves, the 2004 TMDL put forward what we call numeric compliance targets. These are targets associated with ammonia, chlorophyll A, and dissolved oxygen. Chlorophyll A and dissolved oxygen, we call and look at them as response targets, and they are used to assess whether water quality improvements have occurred by decreasing the load of total phosphorus and total nitrogen going into the lakes. In addition to establishing the broad load for all loads going into the lake, the 2004 TMDL broke down those loads and categorized them to the various sources. So you can see here that when we're talking in the TMDL regulatory world, waste load allocations are what are assigned to those subject to NPDES permits or National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits under the Clean Water Act, which are, of course, discharges to waters of the United States from point sources. And then we have load allocations, which are assigned to non-point sources or those that do not receive NPDES permit. They're not a point source subject to an NPDES permit. I think importantly here is to see that in the establishment of the 2004 TMDL, loads were assigned to internal sediment. We know we have internal sediment within the lakes, and that is a non-point source that continues to create issues for algae as well as the warm water, freshwater ecosystems within the lakes is because of that buildup of sediment over time and the cycling and the nutrient flux within the sediment itself. And here is just a table for the first table that I just showed you was for Canyon Lake. And here is a table for Lake Elsinore. And again, the internal sediment is a huge component of the load allocation that is accounted for in Lake Elsinore. And especially since, many of you know that Lake Elsinore has a history of drying up before the levees were put into place, and we provided supplemental water to the lake. Prior to that, during severe drought conditions, it would dry up, sediment would be removed via the Santa Ana winds, and then the cycle would start over. That cycle doesn't start anymore, so we have the sediment buildup that isn't being removed through natural processes anymore for Lake Elsinore, but we do have to account for it as part of the 2004 TMDL and any TMDL moving forward. So since 2004, we'll talk a little bit about just some of the key activities that have occurred. So first of all, here's kind of the timeline of the how the lakes were listed and then what has occurred since the 2004 TMDL leading up to the revisions that I'll then talk more in depth about momentarily. So first of all, Lake Elsinore was actually first listed as impaired for nutrients going back to 1994, and Canyon Lake was added to the list of impaired water bodies in 1998. The Santa Ana Water Board then worked forward to prepare the TMDL and an implementation plan for both of the lakes, which we refer to as the Lake Elsinore Canyon Lake TMDLs. That was adopted by the Santa Ana Water Board in 2004. It was then subsequently approved by the State Water Board and the US EPA in 2005. At about the same time that the State Board and US EPA were reviewing and approving the TMDLs, the Lake Elsinore, the San Jacinto Watershed Authority formed the Lake Elsinore Canyon Lake TMDL Task Force. And that TMDL, then we started implementation. There were, as timelines were to try to meet interim response targets to be attained in 2015. And then the final TMDLs and final response targets were to be attained in 2020. Just to show you here, these are the members of the Lake Elsinore Canyon Lake Task Force. These are the permittee members listed on the slide. Also, key component and members of the task force are regional water board staff. They are non-voting, non-paying members, but their involvement is essential as it ensures that the permittees and the water board are working collectively towards TMDL implementation, and more importantly, to improving water quality of the lakes. I would also note, as many of you are aware, the task force is administered by LESJWA, and the task force meetings are open to the public. Since its formation in 2005, there are some key tasks that the task force and its members have implemented collectively and individually, and some of these tasks were actually started prior to the adoption of the TMDLs. First, just to caveat, the items on this slide are in no way intended to be a comprehensive list of activities. It also doesn't reflect what the task force has done to implement watershed-wide monitoring, as well as monitoring for the lakes, which has been going on since 2006. Quickly, just to highlight some of those activities, we have the initiation of recycled water to Lake Elsinore to maintain lake levels, starting in about 2002. During 2002, 2008, there was a carp removal program. We, of course, have the development and implementation of the LEAM system, or the Lake Elsinore Aeration and Mixing System, in 2008. There were substantial revisions to the municipal stormwater permits in 2010, resulting in the development of comprehensive nutrient reduction plan strategies that were adopted by the Regional Water Board and then began implementation in 2013. We also had the beginning of alum application to Canyon Lake to help sequester the phosphorus starting in 2013. We had the development of the Ag Nutrient Management Program in 2013. There were new ag orders adopted several years after that. And then also we started to work on revisions to the TMDL, and I'll get more into that shortly. Also important, if you haven't seen it, the task force conducted a comprehensive fish survey study for Lake Elsinore that was done over the 2019-2020 period that was submitted to the Santa Ana Water Board. The ag community developed the Ag Surface Runoff Water Quality Index. And then, of course, in 2020, we did prepare a comprehensive compliance assessment report to show kind of where we're at with compliance with the 2004 TMDL. Just here, so a couple of graphs to show you the effectiveness of the alum applications that have occurred since 2013. Here you can see over time the starts in 2013 on the far left, going all the way to 2021. We can update this with more recent data here now, but you can see that the blue bars are after alum and the pink bars are before alum, and these are total phosphorus measurements. Another figure here is to show what's happened with the depth integrated average chlorophyll A that has occurred since the alum applications. And you can see from this graph that the routine low dose of alum additions in Canyon Lake has improved water quality, showing that we can meet the 2004 TMDL numeric targets for chlorophyll A with the introduction of the alum applications. Ultimately, when we look at compliance on a watershed basis, in other words, kind of combining all the sources together and evaluating where we stand for meeting the 2004 TMDL, we've been able to show that we can meet total phosphorus and total nitrogen loads when we account for offsets, in particular for Canyon Lake, for total phosphorus. This does include the amount of internal load that was offset with alum. You can see that in the second column. And we met it by the negative there on the far right. The 53 means we met it with 53 pounds to spare, or kilograms per year, over the 10-year running average for total phosphorus. Total nitrogen, much larger difference between the two. We do not have offsets for total nitrogen in Canyon Lake, nor is it necessary. We are using the phosphorus control method. So we were able to show compliance with the 2004 TMDL. That's for Canyon Lake. And similarly for Lake Elsinore, we can also show here the reductions that allowed us to achieve compliance with the 2004 TMDL by the 2020 or December 31st, 2020 deadline. And all this information is available in the final compliance assessment report, which I believe is on the SAPA website. But compliance with the 2004 TMDL is not enough. The task force recognizes that compliance with the 2004 TMDLs is not enough because the lakes are still experiencing water quality problems. While less prevalent in Canyon Lake as compared to Lake Elsinore, we do know that it too has algal blooms that impact recreational warm water, freshwater beneficial uses. And of course, we're all familiar with some of the challenges we see at Lake Elsinore. So what have those efforts been by the task force in order to update the 2004 TMDL? So starting in 2015, the task force realized that there was going to need to be an update and started planning then, and started hiring appropriate consultants, developing data and information to put together an update. Took a 2-year period of regularly meeting with the task force as well as the regional board to make decisions as to the approach that should be used for the TMDL update, the drafting of technical report and supporting documents. There was a draft report that was submitted then in December of 2018 to the Santa Ana Water Board, which did go out for public review. There was a public workshop on that draft in April of 2019. There was a workshop in May of 2019, a public workshop before the Santa Ana Water Board itself. And then a few months later, the Santa Ana Water Board staff received peer review comments from 6 different peer reviewers. That is more peer reviewers than normal, but because of the complexity of the technical report, the models that were used, and just the complexity associated with the technical TMDL report in these lakes, the State Water Board in its peer review process brought in 6 different peer reviewers. They did have some comments that were of concern to the regional board staff based upon their review of the technical TMDL report. So starting in March of 2020, the task force worked with the Santa Ana Water Board to prepare revisions to the technical TMDL report. That has been ongoing since March of 2020. And the development of additional information. We are getting close, I am happy to say, of hopefully finalizing a technical TMDL draft report. This would be an administrative draft that would then go to the regional water board, and then it would start and go through a public review process. We are hopeful that this effort will be completed by the end of this calendar year. Everybody is working diligently to try to make that happen. But what is that general approach in the draft revised TMDL? Because of the complexity of the lakes and the unique nature of the San Jacinto watershed, the revised TMDL, as developed by the task force, proposes to use what we refer to as a reference condition approach for setting load allocations for total phosphorus and total nitrogen, and for setting numeric targets for the responsive conditions for dissolved oxygen and chlorophyll A. The reference condition approach is essentially to establish the appropriate variables for the lakes to receive natural occurring levels of total phosphorus and total nitrogen that they would have received historically if the watershed had not been developed. To determine this proposed reference condition, Data from the Cranston Guard Station was used in order to evaluate, what would that reference condition have been. And in setting these, what we are currently referring to as interim milestones, it looks at the median of this data set. And then we have what we would call the final proposed load allocations that look at the 25th percentile of this data set. However, a key task in the revised TMDL is to further monitor other potential reference locations and to determine what is appropriate. As part of the TMDL, there are provisions for reevaluation at 10 and 20-year increments in order to assess the data. There are significant studies, which we'll talk a little bit about as well, and the need to gather additional data moving forward. As I indicated, in California, TMDLs typically have what we call a program of implementation for achieving interim milestones and the final load allocations. This TMDL is established with 2 additional phases. You'll see that we call it phase 2 and phase 3. The reasoning for that is phase 1 is the existing 2004 TMDL. This is an extension by now going into phase 2, which would be meeting what we call originally interim TMDLs or interim milestones, and then phase 3. Phase 2 will be the first 20 years 1 through 20, after adoption and the effective date once it gets approved by the State Water Board. First of all, it has to go through the Santa Ana Water Board, then the State Water Board, and then US EPA. And then once it becomes effective, then that keys off a number of different requirements within the TMDL. Phase 3 would be years 21 through 30. These tasks include, importantly, evaluating some of the existing in-lake water quality controls for both Canyon Lake and Lake Elsinore. One of the first tasks we will be doing is reevaluating the alum application and its effectiveness with respect to Canyon Lake. Also, and actually efforts are already underway, as you may have heard throughout today, evaluating different options to the LEAM system for Lake Elsinore. That work has already started and evaluations are happening. A whole component of this is to then implement preferred options for both lakes as to effective ways to help improve water quality and support beneficial uses. Additional studies within the first 20 years, and actually many of these are within the first 5 to 10 years, is to conduct lake bottom sediment sampling so we understand better what's going on in the sediments and the nutrient flux within lake systems. We also understand that we have significant cyanobacteria issues in Lake Elsinore. There is a special study for that as well. And then, of course, continuing fisheries management in order to evaluate the fishery resources within the lakes and Lake Elsinore in particular. There are also reopener provisions to determine if these the milestones and then the final TMDLs need to be revised based upon the information and data that we collect, including the additional reference condition study that I mentioned previously. There will also be the update and the continuation of the monitoring program, which has been ongoing since 2006, which was updated in 2016. And we will look to see if it needs further updating, which includes, of course, watershed monitoring as well as in-lake monitoring. And then for phase 3, which would be years 21 through 30, we will continue to make sure that we have effective in-lake controls and implement new or revised controls if necessary, as well as update the TMDL and continue to do studies for lake bottom sediment sampling and fisheries management. And again, these are just a few out of, I think there are 19 to 20 tasks total. These are just some of them. The ultimate goals for the revised TMDLs is to identify and manage controllable watershed sources of nutrients that flow into Canyon Lake and Lake Elsinore. We want to identify long-lasting in-lake controls that can help address the sediment fluxes and dissolved oxygen levels for protection of the aquatic life, as well as the recreational beneficial uses. We want to understand what are the appropriate criteria in these 2 dynamic lake systems that would protect those beneficial uses. And we want to make sure that for controllable sources within the watershed, that there is a reasonable and feasible and a practical pathway for meeting these water quality criteria and for improving water quality within the lakes. Just a quick snapshot here of the efforts that the task force has undergone to provide significant benefits to LESJWA and its efforts to improve water quality in the lakes. Again, we conduct comprehensive watershed and in-lake monitoring through the task force. We provide resources for implementation of in-lake controls through what we call offset credits. We work closely with the Santa Ana Water Board to address these nutrient impairments. We conduct studies to better understand the lake dynamics, including extensive complex modeling. We evaluate the impacts of the watershed controls, i.e. what are the MS4s agricultural doing in management practices to control nutrient loading that makes its way to the lakes? Are those management practices are they effective? Do we need to update them? Do we need to improve them? We evaluate the fisheries resources, and most importantly, we want to use the best available data and science in order to determine what are the appropriate water quality criteria for the long-term protection of the beneficial uses in the lake. Thank you.